Bună dimineața încă o dată, doamnelor și domnilor. O să vorbim în engleză în cele ce urmează, având încredere în abilitățile voastre și în cunoștințele voastre, pentru că l-avem în studio invitat pe John Florescu. Good morning!
Good morning, great to be here. Fantastic.
John Florescu este producătorul documentarului despre care vă spuneam ieri. A fost difuzat Regele Mihai, Drumul către casă. It's our king's birthday today. And this couldn't be a happier coincidence or synchronicity. What does this documentary bring that we didn't know before? Because from what I've read, there are some new footages shot by King Michael himself, right? Is something new there?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when I was editing the show in the studio, the sound people were saying, God, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that. The fact is most people know the king up until the moment he left. He was a young man. He was 23, 22, 23. He was a young man. Most of his life was lived somewhere else. His life was absolutely dramatic here in those years of his life, and then he disappeared. And he disappeared not because he physically left. He disappeared because he was erased, wiped away from history. And he was wiped away from history for, more than 40 years. And so the amazing thing is, when he came back the first time in the early 90s, he arrived here and he was sent back immediately. This happened 2 or 3 times. But the amazing thing is, people said, oh my God, we have a king. We didn't know that. And he's here, he was there, we saw him on TV. So the extraordinary thing is one of the most important figures in many ways in Romania, who had a big impact on World War II, stepped off the map and never came back, even though, of course, he was doing everything he could in the West to get attention for Romania. I mean, you can imagine a man of that age going to the West. He just got married. He met his wife at Queen Elizabeth's wedding in England, and he's thrown out, put on a train. So this film actually begins where the last film I did in 2016 ends, and that's a train in Sinaia. The last film ends with him leaving on a train. He hoped to Switzerland, but he was afraid it was to Moscow, where he could well be killed. And this one begins on a train to freedom.
I can vouch to what you're saying, because I was only 16 when the revolution came. So for all my childhood life, I heard about King Michael. The official version was that he left, and it's still now widespread in Romanian society, this idea that he left with a train full of gold and paintings and what's more. So this is what I sort of knew, but then I was lucky enough to have my grandfather who knew him. So he told me the truth. He didn't know, my grandfather couldn't know how many paintings he took with him. But he said, look, it's probably all BS. I mean...
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, just think about it. He was forced to sign a letter of abdication. They said, go to Sinaia, spend 3 days, get your stuff, and leave. Now, you can't imagine that they'd allow him to be taking paintings and stuff out. They actually had loaves of bread that they stuck with knives to be sure there weren't any jewelry inside. The material that arrived in Lausanne, we actually have footage of the suitcases that were taken off the train. You can count them. They're about 6. Now, whether artwork was taken on a previous occasion, because King Carol II, and I'm not quite sure, we didn't get into that. But as far as the king going out with a bunch of stuff, that was nonsense.
There are some, excuse me for interrupting, but there are some historians even who say that there was a deal made with the communist government. Petru Groza was
correct.
That he could take away 40 or 47 paintings. Some true to that?
I heard that rumor myself, and I saw his lawyer in Geneva. His name is Michael Flax, and I asked him about this. He said, listen, we had a case brought against us by the Romanian communist government at the time. It was tried in Switzerland, and it was tried in the United States. Both courts weighed in favor of the king. Now, whether on a previous occasion or circumstances I don't know, I can't be sure. We dig very deeply into our research, but when we fall short of doing an investigation, we're not a detective service, but we dig very hard into our research. We go to all kinds of archives all over the world. We went to CIA archives, we went to Secretariat archives, we went to the Swiss archives, and but we found no record of that. But I can't say, here's a producer who does that. I have a carte blanche for the whole thing. I just simply don't know, but I certainly know about that trip.
So let's take it chronologically. So he's in Sinai in a train. King Michael is in Sinai in a train. He's 22. What happens next? So he's afraid he's going to be taken to Moscow.
Correct. He wasn't sure. The train leaves, the windows were sealed. He arrives in Switzerland. The king has arrived. The French newspaper has a cover story, King Michael leaves, no money. That was a headline in the Figaro that time.
Wow.
He has to find a role for himself. And he goes to England to see his royal relatives, and then goes to see Harry Truman, the President of the United States. Now, Harry Truman had given him an award, a citation for bravery for arresting Antonescu. I mean, he arrested Antonescu. If that didn't go well, that operation in the palace, it could have been the king who was killed the next day and not Antonescu being arrested. So he goes to see Harry Truman, and Truman meets him only for about 15 minutes in the White House. As the king told me, it was a sort of inconsequential visit. Now, why was that? Because the world shifted, and now we are dealing with two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. And all of a sudden, they didn't need people to remind them about the fact that we should have left Eastern Europe with the West and so on. A deal had been done at Yalta, a deal that disappointed the king. I spoke to Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth's husband, about this thing. And he said to me in 2017, he's his cousin. He said, I understand how he feels. I understand the disappointment. He's my cousin. But as Prince Philip said, he said, I couldn't tell Churchill that we had to go fight for Romania again. Our country was exhausted. Stalin had lost millions. We had to give Stalin something. And so what they gave him was all of Eastern Europe except Greece. So what you have is an amazing situation.
But Churchill did tell King Michael to go back to Romania, right? After the wedding, I think it was.
Well, there was a wedding, and Churchill. It was a wedding of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And the Romanian king Mihai goes to Churchill and asks his opinion, and he says, "I've always done the courageous thing." Now the king was confused by that statement. What does that mean? Mean going back or what? And he said, only Bevin, Foreign Secretary Bevin, was the one who told me the truth. Forget about it. We're not going to bail you out. We're not going to send troops and anything else. And then we get to the question that you raised, is that the CIA then contacts him. He comes to the United States. There's a guy called Wisner, Frank Wisner, who was an agent here but then became head of the CIA. He's a famous track star in college. And he knew the king. And they came with an idea. And the idea was, let's put you on our side. They offered him $60,000 a house. $60,000 in those days is half a million, right? Today. And they say, we'll kind of take care of you. And the king smelled something he didn't like. He smelled a deal from powerful nations that, let's say, like at Yalta, don't always come out right. And I think there was an innate suspicion in himself to deal with these people was a big risk. Big powers against little powers. CIA said, the king doesn't want to go along. They come up with another idea. They're going to send paratroopers, and it's all in the CIA documents we got. And these guys are going to be trained, equipped. They're mostly Romanian exiles and CIA agents, and dropped into the mountains in Romania. And the whole thing, the king just walked away from that because he was afraid that thing would backfire. And of course it did, because the operation was revealed probably through the embassy, the British embassy in Washington, and they captured him and shot him all in Jilava.
Yep.
So I guess the thing is, say, what his life about? His life was about trying to get back and do whatever he could to get back to this country, to keep the flame alive.
He is such a tragic figure. I mean, from childhood on, he was traumatized psychologically. I mean, he couldn't meet his mother at some points, right? He was always fought for by his father, by governments, by Antonescu. He wanted to use him. Then the communists wanted to use him. Then he goes away. Americans want to use him. CIA, British want to use him for cleaning their image, their public persona. And I guess he stayed that way till the end of his life because he wouldn't want to cut deals. I mean, everyone would say, hey, an intelligent person should cut deals in life. I mean, what does it bring if you die and you're right? But what people seem to forget is that kings don't have this short cut in life. If kings cut deals, they become presidents.
That's very interesting.
I want to come back to that. We just have some 1 minute of advertising.
Guerrilla de Dimineața.
8 și 27 de minute, doamnelor, genilor. Dacă sunteți un pic bulversați de faptul că vorbim în engleză, vorbim cu John Florescu, producatorul executiv al documentarului Regele Mihai, Drumul către casa. A fost difuzat ieri pe TVR.
Yes, History Channel.
History Channel, sorry. So, hello again.
Thank you very much. Good to be
John Florescu. So, we were in the train. He leaves. He gets to Lausanne. Okay.
And then he basically tries to pick up the voice of Romania from overseas. That wasn't a difficult job. Let's look at the situation. He had not much money to survive. He was one of many ex-royals who was pushed from the East and Central Europe to the West. The West European monarchies were still, at least in England, very strong. So maybe not in the center of play. The nations in the big powers in the West were not looking to create new issues with the Soviet Union. And in his own country, he was being erased. So he was disappearing. His voice was disappearing. And he said, I remember, quite emotionally, he said it was tough, it was very, very hard, and you understand it. But the dignity of the man in pursuing this thing against a lot of odds was extraordinary. The nice thing is, eventually, he was able to come back, and eventually he was able to help his country with the EU, because he was European, with NATO, and because he could go to other heads of state via the royal families in Belgium, where there's a king, in Spain, where there's a king, in England, and he was related to all these people.
He's a direct descendant of Queen Victoria,
correct, that's correct, yeah. He's a direct descendant. And so, interestingly, one of his aides was telling me that when they were in Geneva, they had to provide him protection because any descendant of Queen Victoria has the protection, the long arm and reach of the British government.
Wow. Only, physical protection or financial protection?
No, physical. The Queen did offer help herself. He offered a home. But, it was interesting. I was talking to one of his close friends at the time, and when he was watching the execution of Ceausescu, and I said, what was his reaction? He said, I was standing right next to him. He was watching it on TV like everybody in '89 at Christmas. And he said it was a very wrong thing. They never should have done that. They never should have shot him. And it actually mirrors a comment of Gorbachev, who came here after Ceausescu was shot. And when he was getting on his plane to go back to Moscow, he turned around, I think, and looked at Iliescu and said, why did you shoot him like a dog? So there was a feeling of justice, even in the way Ceausescu was an enemy of his and vice versa. They followed him, according to the studies that we saw at the Securitate and at the Swiss police office in the canton of Geneva. They actually rented houses near his own house. He had 4 different places in Geneva, around Geneva, and to observe and watch him. So you have the Securitate watching the king. You have the Swiss authorities watching the Securitate.
And the British government, right?
And the British government. Everybody's watching. It's almost comic if it wasn't. And his inner circle had been penetrated, and he was aware of it, but he didn't know who, when, why. But it was around him.
So he did know that he was watched by 3 different governments and what's more, and but he didn't know who it was.
Well, he knew he was knew there were death threats against him. but he was very brave about it. I mean, talking to those people, I basically spoke to people who are now in their 80s and their 90s, who were with him either in Switzerland or in England or now back in Romania. And they said that he was conscious of what was going, but maybe not fully conscious. One person said the only person he trusted was his immediate family. Outside of that, but I felt among those people who I saw, the head of the Royal Household, Dan Bedek, and other people, they loved him. You know, when you talk to somebody face to face, close, a meter away, where you feel that love and the affection, and those people love the man in his utter modesty and simplicity, because that was a wonderful quality about him. He's a very modest man. He's a man driven by his religious faith, but also by his modesty in his manner.
He was, and I think this is what some people don't understand. There were people, even a former president, I don't even want to mention his name, who tried to destroy his public persona and his character. And they don't understand that some people, they don't want to know about political stuff and so on. They like not necessarily his decisions. They like the fact that he never cut corners. He never committed this political adultery, and he never. He always stayed true to his belief that a king is more than just an executive or a manager, which is a president. No, a king is there to remind people how one should be and what true character looks like, and how you have to sacrifice things in life to remain valuable as a human being. And he did that throughout his life. He sort of never failed, right? Is there something shameful in what he did?
Well, listen,
or at least mildly shameful.
I think that when he came back here, he came for a consecration up in Putna, and it was a religious reason. I think the man, as a man, became very religious over time. I think his lack of faith in men had transferred into a faith in God. And I think people recognize that. He didn't say too much. He didn't push himself out too much. He was a figure that, you know, like a child to a grandfather, felt a sense of comfort and stability and calm. And even though it was humiliating, I mean, you know, he was kind of pushed out socially, even from, not pushed out, but, you know, pushed away from the British royal family. But at the end, on the Queen's Jubilee, she had I don't know, about 25 different European monarchs and so forth. And who's next to her in the picture? Michael, right to the right of the Queen. So everybody saw an element and sense of dignity and consistency, and they never lost sight of it, and he never allowed anybody to have an opportunity to take that away from him.
Did they love him? I mean, you know, did you talk about it?
Well, you know, the Prince Philip knew both the wife from their time in Paris, in Neuilly, on the outside, and also they knew him, you know, in the post-war situation. But I think that what happened was many of the royal families, they were distanced from the British royal family to some extent. And, you know, also just to participate in the social life of these families, it costs money. You have to fly there. You have to have beautiful clothes. He was surviving. He had a chicken farm once, and then he had a repair shop. He worked as a pilot for an American billionaire called William Lear from Santa Monica.
He had a company at one point, an electronics company?
Yeah, electronics company. And he also worked in New York, or was trained in New York. As a broker. And it's funny because the guy says, "What's your name?" He says, King Michael of Romania. The guy said, "Well, you know, we don't really go by those names over here, you know, very practical American thing." He said, "How about Mr. Michael King?" "Oh, no problem, Mr. Michael King."
That was his broker name.
Yeah, Mr. Michael King.
Mr. Michael King.
There were 146 Mr. Michael Kings in New York. We went through the register, and we're trying to find this particular one, but there were 146. None of them, or no one for that matter, carries a title necessarily under the Securities Exchange Commission's SEC. But we checked the files. But he's Mr. Michael King.
But I don't think he was very good at being a broker.
He didn't like it.
Because you have to be quite sharky.
Yeah. No,
So he
it
didn't
wasn't
like
his game. I mean, that
Right.
wasn't his
To
game.
buy Bitcoin and GameStop and short the shorters and whatever. It wasn't him.
No, I don't think that was his ball game at all.
We're going to come back and I'm going to ask you to tell us about these human sides of him. And I mean, he had to provide for himself and for his many children. So what did he do just after this?
Guerrilla de Dimineața.
Am întors, bună dimineața, cu John Florescu, producătorul executiv al documentarului Regele Mihai, Drumul către casă. Good morning again.
Nice
And
to see you.
we were preparing to talk about this. People, I think, still cannot believe in Romania after 30 years of sort of freedom that he had to work. A king of his caliber had to work to make it through the day. Even now, I'm sure half of the people cannot believe this. So, what did he have to do?
Well, he did many different things. You have to understand that he wasn't somebody who lived on pretense and appearances. He worked, had a chicken farm in England, near Basingstoke, near London. They just basically, had a business, and everybody worked in the business, husband and wife. His wife was a Bourbon of the French royal family.
Did she have money?
Well, I think the money in these families is always under attack because they don't have any big jobs. They're not big money makers. So when your family gets knocked out in the 18th century, the money starts to run out. What they do have is a sense of duty and modesty that allows them to work. There's no shame to working. And I felt that observing his wife, I always felt that was very much a style I've seen in France before. He also worked as a stockbroker in New York, as I was mentioning. He was trained in New York as a pilot and a tester of aeronautics for an American billionaire called William Lear. And so he went to Santa Monica, California, the hot beach of California, where he was doing his testing, and then came back and delivered planes throughout Western Europe to clients, and also dealing with the instrumentation. But he didn't mind ironing his own shirts. One of the ladies who told us, Danielle Malfleurs, was telling us about how he would iron his own shirts and actually do a very good job. And his wife would go to the Migros, which was like the Carrefour of the place. And they just had normal lives in Switzerland. And I think in many ways they liked the normalcy. They didn't like.
That's what I wanted to ask you. You've talked to him several times. Was it somehow even a kind of luck? Because otherwise he would have had to be a king for all his life, right? Never knowing these small pleasures in life, like going to a supermarket or flying a plane or whatever. Did he ever tell you that this was okay, that this was...
Yeah, I mean, I never had a sense that any of these roles bothered him, because there's a dignity in work, of course, that anybody would know. And he never had to live on pretense. He didn't have a palace. He didn't have, an army at his command and beck and call. So in that sense, I think he was at peace with himself. I think where he was not at peace with himself, it was very difficult for him to trust anybody in the end. And I think his decision ultimately to stay in Switzerland, as much as people may have said, the medical situation would have been better for an old man, I think he could walk down the street, and they'd say, "Bonjour, Monsieur Michel," something like. People sort of knew he was the king. Mm-hmm. But of course, in Geneva, there's all kinds of characters and individuals that are walking around, maybe former heads of state or former leaders and so forth, and everybody sort of leaves him alone. He couldn't do that. He couldn't walk down the street of Bucharest just like that. And I think perhaps, as a speculation of mine, but at that moment of his life, he wanted a place as one of stillness and quietness. As one of his advisors said, it was never a bad idea to have a place in Switzerland, because you never know what can happen. And in his life, he'd seen it all.
Yeah. He was used... We were talking about him being used. He was used even by the Romanian state, right? After Iliescu didn't allow him to come into the country, turning him back from the airport. Years after that, he's asking him, hey, could you help us with the European Union? You have some friends. The Romanian politicians always do this. I mean, they always seem like irreconcilable foes. And then in a couple of years, hey, but could you? Hey, I always liked you, actually. You know, it's what happened with even people from my family, with former Securitate officers, and meeting years after that. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, it wasn't that bad, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think there's, I guess that distinction isn't reserved solely for Romanian politicians, but all politicians. And I think that in the case that he came to service of his country, reminds you of the fact that he had his eye on the high objective, which was the interest of his nation and the interest of his people. And I think that when he came back here, he made a point to go to the countryside, and someone was telling me about a woman who had fought communism in some village, I forget, near Făgăraș somewhere, and they said it was the most emotional moment of his life when he saw somebody who had the guts and courage in a difficult period to resist.
Was it Elisabeta Riza?
Yes,
I think?
That's it. Elisabeta Riza, well remembered.
Yeah.
And we were actually looking for footage of that meeting, but we couldn't find any, because pictures, of course, are better than still pictures, but it was one of the most, according to his friend, one of the most powerful moments of his life, because he saw somebody of his deep metal, but who actually was facing the adversary in her face.
She was tortured. She was hung by her hair. She was, and she didn't cave in.
She didn't cave in.
Yeah.
And so, well, okay, the world's changed. People, come around and say, okay, now can you help your country? We realize you can help your country. We realize you can be effective in doing that as well. And he did it. And so bravo to him. And you saw it in the crowds at his funeral, there were young people and old people and all kinds of people. That day reminded me of a day when John Kennedy was shot in the United States. The whole country stopped. Everybody stopped, and no one was working. All the TV stations were covering. There was an element of solemnity and respect. Who would get that today? You'd say nobody.
I was there at the funeral, and this is what people who were there was probably crying about. That he was the last one of his kind. He was the end of an era. And these two eras were one in which people would push up their beliefs of good, of what it is that is good in people. They would push it up on a pyramid, and they would emotionally and rationally elect a king who would be the best of what people can be. That's why he was a symbol. I mean, it probably anthropologically it started in tribes. Probably they would elect the strongest, but also the best one. Because if he would be only the strongest, he would be killed by night. Yeah. You cannot not sleep. So people got to elect and to push up people who were perfect. At least they seemed perfect. And then this perfection came back onto people. It was this bijective function.
Right.
And now we elect people, we don't know who they are. The masses, usually, according to Gauss's curve, they're kind of mediocre and stupid. They don't know, so they elect people, and those people use the masses. They're psychopaths, usually. So it was the end of an era where a principle, where a king would have his main reason to be a stability pole and to be a symbol. It's what King Michael did. I will not do anything that destroys my symbolism. This is what kings have to do, and they do. But that was the last one.
It's a very good analogy you make about sort of a triangular push upward. I think that's a very insightful observation. I would say that I asked in these 5 hours of interviews, I asked the king, what's the difference between a president and a king? And he said, well, first of all, we are born in our job, in a sense. It's an accident of birth. We're not a member of a political party. We don't have to appeal to a specific group to get more than 50%. We are not after money because we should have sufficient things to live. We're there for life. And therefore, our interests are not short-term. Our interests are not personal. Our interests are to the nation if you govern correctly. And at the end of the day, he said, my role would be, he had in his mind, like a referee in a football game who has a whistle. And when things get out of hand, when everybody's fighting like kids around, he takes out his whistle, he blows it hard and says, stop, everybody back off. Yeah. You're all messing up. So I think it's an interesting analogy, and I think it's a useful role. I mean, I'm not a monarchist, but I think the king lost his moment in history, because what happened when people all of a sudden welcomed back this king to Romania, he was a king of a dramatic story that ended at a very young age. And then the world moved to a post-communist world, and then a post-communist world, and then into a modernity that all of a sudden seemed like another era. You look back at the film and you say, that was in one life. All the isms he saw, monarchy, he saw communism, he saw capitalism, or this kind of post-capitalism that we have in Romania. He had seen it all, and he didn't seem part of it anymore. And I think that is a reality that he was willing to face. He'd be helpful, he could do what he can, but I don't believe he felt that somehow a monarchy could come back in a European Union with a constitution and people who don't even know who the heck he was. I was talking to some young people after last night's broadcast. It's airing again tonight, Monday at 9. But one person said, well, it's very hard for us to understand this man because we don't know anything about him. And then I spoke to somebody else who said, you know what? I didn't even want to leave during the commercials, the long commercial breaks, like 3 minutes. He said, I didn't want to miss anything. I've never seen anything like this. So that's what you have basically within a new generation.
I think presidents will be elected on TikTok in a couple of years. I'm sure about it.
Well, it's quite remarkable that, the game of technology and the way information moves around. And, we should talk a lot about fake news and so forth. I think that is a very negative and disastrous effect. I worked in U.S. politics for Democratic politicians and for the Kennedys, and I see an enormous evolution between the kind of politics that was going on in presidential campaigns and what's happening today.
What was, according to you, the most revealing aspect of the documentary, the highlight?
I think it's that it's not a dramatic highlight in the sense of action. It is a highlight in the sense that the life had a full circle logic to it, and that with all the drama at the beginning, and a departure, he could return home. He could return home with his head high. He could return home with being of service to his nation. He could return home by people admiring and appreciating him and remembering him. And in that way, it's a beautiful full circle, and he did it without any compromises on the way.
It's a royal hero's journey.
Yeah, that's well put. Exactly right.
Wow. Thank you so much, John Florescu. So it's going to air tonight, and I think on several occasions after that?
And then in 44 countries around the world, so beginning in 2000. And then we're going to do a national tour with the film, like we did with Queen Marie in 2018. We went to 40 cities, and we're going to take it around the country, because the great thing is to go to the countryside and see how people react. Not in the big cities, in the little cities, and not in the fancy cities, but in Zalău and Petroșani and places like that.
How did they react at Queen Marie's movie? Some of them, I guess, some of them were like, yeah, but they left with a train full of gold, and the other ones were crying, probably.
Well, you'd see grandmothers bringing their children, like you describing your family, and the grandmothers would say afterwards, "You see what this is about." And Romania doesn't have that many heroes, and we've been able to capture a couple. And I think it's important for people to have heroes in their own history. Certainly the French do, certainly we as Americans do. And I think it's fantastic for people to understand that in your own country you have fabulous heroes who were sort of forgotten.
Thank you so much, John Florescu. And let's meet at the next movie, right?
Perfect, okay.
Are you preparing something?
Yes, I am.
Still in the royal realm?
Nope, not in the royal realm, but I think something that'll be pretty impactful.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Guerrilla de Dimineața.